Hello, I'm Todd Phillips, the editor of Canadian Auto Dealer. We're here today with Michelle Denogean, the CMO of Roadster, one of the major digital retailing providers. So we're going to catch up with her about NADA and a little bit about how the company has been evolving over the past little bit, especially now as more dealers are embracing digital retailing. So Michelle, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Todd.
Let's start a bit with NADA. We're doing this interview now right in, so really almost at the midway point of NADA. So you've had a chance to assess sort of, the traffic, people coming to the booth and the differences of the physical event. Obviously not the same experience, but what's been your feedback so far as an exhibitor and a participant?
Yeah, I think, the content that NADA brings to the industry is incredible. So I've been watching a lot of the sessions and there's just been some really incredible content for anybody who hasn't been, in and out of that. I think the one challenge we have is focus, as it relates to a virtual event. And this is not just NADA specific. I think we've experienced this throughout, 2020 and as we enter into 2021, which is I think that the one thing that we're missing when we're trying to do something virtually is the focus of somebody actually leaving their dealership or their area of business and going on intentionally with intent to these conferences to network and learn and so that's the biggest thing. I think of it more like almost like grab and go, right? People are coming in, they're consuming content, but they're not as focused on the intent. So while we are getting some good engagement, there within the NADA platform, I think we all as an industry collectively miss the in-person relationship building, the sharing of best practices, and just the connection. So I think, everybody, when I always think of like what's going to happen when NADA is in person next year, everybody's just going to be almost like this like amazing industry reunion, right? Of everybody gathering and connecting. So I think it's just different. It's much more focused on the content and sort of grab and go intent versus sort of the overall experience. And that's just been the reality with these virtual events generally this year.
Well, I look forward to next year dropping by your booth and having a chat in the booth as we've done in previous years. It's definitely a different way to exchange. We'll have to deal with the Zoom constraints at the moment. But overall, yeah, there's no question the physical events it's more than just the content. It's the networking, it's the randomness of the people that you happen to bump into. It's some more purposeful encounters and meetings in booths where you can have a product demo, whereas you say you're not so close to your email, so close to your phone and in the midst of your day-to-day. So I don't think, as you say, dealers check out for the same way they have before. But nonetheless, I guess for those that are coming by, what kind of conversations are you having with them about the digital retailing suite and certainly the evolution of
Yeah.
the
I
industry?
think I think the people that are coming by have intent. Like I said, they're very focused on talking to us about our platform, and it's much more, I would say, down funnel conversations of like, we want to see it, we're interested, versus what I would normally see is a lot of networking and sort of high level discussions about what is digital retailing, where is it headed, that kind of thing. But we really are looking at ways to sort of embrace what's happening with NADA and around NADA. So as an example, like we were just talking about, one of the things that I think is very hard to replicate is the networking aspect. So as an organization, we said, how do we provide this to dealerships in some capacity? And so most of this week, we're hosting what we call, community live Q&A sessions. So think of it like a webinar, very short, like an hour long, but instead of us presenting anything, we're just giving dealers the opportunity to talk to one another. And so we've got some great partners that have been open to moderating that conversation, being interviewed, answering questions, and really just honestly, no agenda. We're really just fielding everything that's in the Q&A. So in a normal webinar, that would be like the last 10 minutes, and it's the whole hour of people asking questions and just trying to understand what each other are doing. So that's a little bit of what we are trying to do as it relates to what's happening around the conference. Maybe not necessarily in the NADA platform, but just trying to use this week of focus, to whatever focus it is, to provide these opportunities. Because what we know is that dealers love to talk to one another and learn from one another. And so we do that all the time, where we just try to make those connections in the industry.
I have a question for you. I know I was actually just interviewing somebody yesterday who, they run a number of performance groups and dealer, 20 groups and such. And they were saying their concern is there was this initial rush towards digital retailing tools in the early days of the pandemic. But then once things started opening up again, it looked like it was a good year. There was oh, good, we don't have to fully embrace that. Let's get back to the way things were. So, and there's even some, as digital retailing had its moment, and I guess his concern was it hasn't really been captured, as opposed to this is just an evolution. So it may have had a kickstart to digital retailing in the course of all this, but is it sticky enough? And do dealers need to really not just do a sort of an interim stopgap? Hey, we did this during the crisis and forget about it. What's obviously, I know what your answer might be in there, but are you seeing some of that? Are you seeing some of that?
I mean, I think there's realistically always going to be a segment of dealerships who sign on, especially we call it like panic buying, right? Like we need this right now out of necessity. And as my good friend David Kane told me at one point, there's going to be some that are like, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to give it back. Okay, I bought it, but here you go. You can have it back. But what we really are seeing, and I think what has been really interesting throughout this time period, is those that really took it on and looked at how do I incorporate this into my sales process, are the ones that are reaping benefits that I didn't think were even benefits at the time. I think when, we go back sort of pre-pandemic, everybody was looking at digital retailing as this sort of buzzword, this sort of expedited way to modernize the customer experience. And it was all about the customer. And I think those that really embraced it during this time are realizing that it's not just for the customer. In fact, really, in order to modernize the customer experience, you have to make it easier for your sales team to sell. And so that's the big aha moment that we saw. And we've done quite a few studies on this sort of throughout last year, which is the efficiencies that it creates for the sales team at the dealership in order to, really guide people through. So whether that customer is remote and they're at home and you're working the deal that way, or they're sitting in your showroom, it really is about every touch point of that experience. And when you do that, when you can engage with a customer wherever they are, you're creating real efficiencies for your team. Because if you think about it, when somebody's in your showroom, is a very linear process, right? You as a salesperson are not going to get up and leave the customer side and go talk to another customer. It just doesn't happen. You're there, right? If that customer's there for 3 hours, you are dedicated. And so it really puts a cap on what that individual salesperson can do from a sales perspective. But when you're working with people remotely, you can work with multiple customers at once. And I think that is the big aha as an industry that we have discovered, is this whole concept of, my website is my showroom, and these people are here on my website and they're ready to buy. And so if I give them the tools to do that, and I have some kind of engagement where I can walk them through, it's actually not only a win-win for the customer who doesn't want to spend 3 hours in the showroom, it's actually a win-win for my dealership. And so while I do think there are dealers that are like, okay, I'm ready, give it back, right? They did it as a short-term gap. For sure, there are dealers that have done that. A lot of people have realized this is so much more than what I thought it was. And in fact, now what I'm seeing is I can actually do more with less. My people can sell more units per person than I ever thought possible. And we, seen that time and time again. We actually tracked that throughout 2020 to see that the average units per salesperson was growing. So we always said it was 10, right? It's been like 30 something years of 10 as the average units. But as we went through the year last year, we saw it grow up to 17 units. That's an average. There are dealerships where salespeople using this technology, they were selling 50 plus units per person in a month. So I think that's really become, how do I want to operate? How do I digitize my sales process? And it's less about the digital retailing. It's more just about the retail experience end to end.
That's interesting. So I guess I have this vision that you conjured up of a multitasking millennial with 4 or 5 screens up and a phone, texting, generating quotes and doing this all in real time. And the better they are, I guess, at juggling, the better they're going to be at serving those customers, right? So does this?
Although I will say though, Todd, that some of our best multitaskers are the older, salespeople at the dealership that have these loyal followings, and they've just found that with all these people that have bought, over and over and over again, it's so easy to just send this to them digitally. Why do they have to come into the showroom? So it's interesting to see how it's not just you have that picture of that millennial with the phone and this computer screen, but it's not just that generation. And it's really interesting to see people that maybe weren't as technologically savvy just diving in and doing all of those things themselves.
That's actually, you raise an interesting point. It's really, digital retailing tools are great. The software is there, can do amazing things, but it is about a sales process change, and that's why it's been harder to get, adoption in some cases, because you're used to people that have a traditional path of just they have a gut instinct that it's worked for them for X amount of years, and you have to say there's this new way of doing it. They're going to be uneasy swinging from one vine to the next, right? It's just human nature and change management. So I think a lot of the work that you've found, and we've discussed it before, is really working within the dealerships and tackling the process and tackling the change management, as opposed to, hey, Roadster's here, here's a new set of tools, let's go, let's embrace these. So maybe speak about the work you guys have had to do over the last year on that side, which is almost the harder side than the innovation on the software tools, right?
Yeah, no, I think you're right in that thought. We always tell people you don't have to boil the ocean, and we never want people to think like we're saying that in order to use the technology, you have to wildly change your process, because that is not the case. In fact, a lot of our partners will say, it was so great. I had this vision of where I wanted to take my dealership, and the technology was so flexible to work with me as I rolled this out, right? So we actually have 5 different implementation levels, and we work through based on what the dealership's objectives are. So if they really are just trying to engage customers online and that is their core focus and they don't want to change any of their process, it still really can work in that capacity. You're not going to get as many benefits as if you go all the way to level 5 and it's, fully every person in your dealership is using the technology. But we try to really make it so that you can prove that value and not have to. There's very few, change is hard. Like you said, there's very few people that are just rip the Band-Aid. Let's make all these major changes at once. And so we like to say, well, let's start slowly. Let's make sure that you guys are really understanding in your internet BDC teams, how to interact with customers in this remote capacity. And then we'll figure out, are you really looking to connect that experience to the showroom? And, we'll show you the tools to do that. But it really is a, how do we crawl, walk, run situation where you want to prove value and you want those other people in the showroom to be like, oh, what is Todd doing differently? Well, what he's doing is really interesting. He's actually selling a lot more units. Like, how do I have some of that magic in my own pocket? And so that sort of snowball and that buy-in is the best kind because it's so organic.
Well, one of the interesting things that we've all lived through as well is that we're starting to adapt in all other aspects of our life, whether it's ordering our food or delivery or certainly Amazon. And, with the lockdowns in Canada and many parts of this country are still in lockdown and people are still, not able to physically go to retail outlets. So there's a consumer shift in just adapting tools like this, Zoom for communication. Everyone is sort of can master the basics of it now. So I think that will probably aid not just on the dealership process side, but on the consumer ability to navigate through these online tools to get to a price, to add F&I products, all the other nice things you can do. So I think as we all get more used to necessity being the mother of invention using these tools, I think it bodes well for the industry being able to shift at the same time as their consumers and not necessarily ahead of them, right?
Yeah, I think that is one of the interesting things to think about through this time is everybody is in it together, right? Consumers, the dealerships, and everybody knows that. Everybody, through this pandemic has been really thinking about how do I engage in this digital way and try new things. And so there's some community in that, some forgiveness in that, but also some community in that, right? We're all sort of in this together. And I think that's boded really well for building relationships digitally as well, right? Is that the consumer and the dealership are side by side trying to sort of navigate this new road. I have been talking to quite a few dealerships lately that are just saying it's been such an ebb and flow situation. And I'm sure you guys are seeing that also out in the Canadian market, especially with the lockdowns. Is sometimes some weeks you wake up and you're like, oh, there's people coming to my showroom. And the next week, you're like, oh, now, foot traffic is really down and people are engaging with me remotely. And so I still think we're in that situation from a pandemic standpoint where the comfort changes depending on the week, depending on, you could probably map it very specifically across case counts and other things that are happening with COVID. But I think we all have to be prepared to be flexible based on the comfort level of our customers.
That's great, great answer. The last question I have for you is really just around the OEM space, because dealerships can sort of try to do this on their own. The digital retailing space is getting increasingly crowded for people to try to differentiate the products and services. And I imagine an individual rooftop or even a dealer group would struggle to sort of make sense of the landscape. So maybe speak about the work you're doing at the OEM level to, to prove to them that you're a certified provider and one of the top players in the space.
Yeah, it's been interesting, and this was pre pandemic that these relationships started. But a lot of the OEMs, if you take a step back and you think about where their core focus always is, it's on the customer experience and the brand experience that they offer. And so there's a lot of interest happening from the manufacturer side of how do we create this, brand experience when you're doing this digitally as well. And so a lot of them have invested very heavily. They have, programs where they're certified certain providers. Our take on it has really always been to make sure that we are able to provide services to as many franchise dealers as possible. And while the OEMs are very focused on their specific brand, the dealer groups are focused on much more of a scale perspective of I might have a Honda store and a Toyota store and a Mercedes store, right? And so I really just want to use one platform and manage one relationship across all of these stores. And so that's why we're so proud that we're the most certified digital retailing provider here in the States, because we can be that to all of our dealer groups, across North America, is really be that sort of Switzerland to say, you can have us in whatever, capacity you need us to be. But I think the manufacturers, it's just an interesting thought process to think, though, about now that we as an industry are so much more commerce enabled. I think the other trend that we're starting to see is the manufacturers are thinking about how do we make this more of a tierless experience. We still have franchise laws. We still really appreciate and value the retailer and what's happening there. But how do we create a customer experience that maybe starts from a tier one website all the way down to the retailer's website and just create some cohesion. So I think there's a lot happening, in that regard. And I think we'll see more of that here in the future, where the manufacturers are trying to figure out how do I get my consumers to engage with my retailers, even when they hit my tier one website. And so that's sort of the trend that we're seeing, and the conversations that we're having is around, okay, now we've got these certifications, but how do we take it to the next level? Make sense?
It does, and that's something that's always been a fear, I guess, of dealers to a certain extent, is being disintermediated to a certain extent from the process, franchise laws notwithstanding, because they do have that direct connection to the customer and they want to maintain that. So it's a question of who's going to own that customer experience. But that is a huge topic and much bigger than the time we have for today. But I appreciate you raising it and sharing an update for us on NADA and just really what the company's up to. I always enjoy our catch-up conversation. So thanks for that.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Signing
Thanks,
off.
Bud.